Alright, it's that time of the beta where we have the banners. Of course, Linnea is going to be debuting, and the reruns we will be getting are Nefer, Lauma, and Chasca. Apologies to everyone hoping for Malvika. Hello there, Flip here, and today we're going to be talking about the units on banner in Luna 6, discussing their value and if Linnea is worth pulling for you, and for the rerun units just how well they've improved since their last banners, and if they are still worth going for, as well as discussing the vertical investment prospects of each character, and if their signature or constellations are worth going for. But before we do that, as always, if at any points during the video you're entertained or informed, make sure to drop a like and even consider subscribing, as I talk on various topics regarding Genshin's meta, and I'll try to keep you updated. Shout out to my lovely channel members, I really appreciate your support. You continue to enable my horrible life decisions, very grateful for that. And also, so currently on banner we have Varka and Flint, so if you'd like to cut down on the costs while going for them, then I would like to announce the sponsor for today's video, LD Shop. LD Shop is a very safe and reliable top-up site that allows you to get Primo Gems at a great deal starting from 15% off, while keeping your data safe. As for transactions, you only need to type in your UID and region, as you can see me doing here. Just needed to quickly refresh my welkin, and as you can see it's here. And make sure to use my link, as that way you'll receive an extra 15% off coupon, as well as a 5% off coupon which can save you up to $50. LD Shop goes through official channels as well, meaning that you won't lose any of the in-game benefits like first-time top-up bonuses, so no need to worry. And additionally, because LD Shop is so great, users who spend over $80 will receive a VIP membership which rewards you with free welcome moons. So head over to ldshop.gg using my link in the description below. What are you waiting for? Thanks to LD Shop for sponsoring this video, now back to it. Alright, let's start with Linnea. If you watched my last video, you'd know that she acts as a support and sub DPS for lunar crystallized teams, having very strong off-field sub DPS, while offering a 30% GRS shred permanently, and potentially giving you a decent EM buff if you are a Nordcry character, or she gains it herself. She's basically what a Nefer and Lauma are to their respective archetype. So of course, if you're someone who's recently pulled for Zibai, considering the fact that you almost have a month to save up, I can confidently recommend her to any Zibai players, due to how much she buffs her, and being an actual competent final slot for the team. And I would especially recommend her to Zibai players who didn't manage to get a C6 Illua, as what she adds to teams is comparable to a C6 Illua, and therefore if you have something like a C6 Goro, but not a C6 Illua, you most likely are better off replacing him until you get him to C6, and having Linnea in your teams instead, or you can obviously just run them together. Linnea also has very little flaws in her kit that I can point out, as she doesn't really need to use her burst ever, so she has low animation times, as well as not having an effective energy requirement, is the fact that if you already have a decently invested Zibai that's like C1 or C2, as well as having her hyper buffing supports like Illua and Goro, Linnea's buffing is kind of underwhelming. She's offering the 14% base damage multiplier, 100-ish elemental mastery, and a GRS shred, where Goro and Illua are technically enhancing her damage more. So unless you're getting Linnea's weapons or constellations to make her a better buffer, or value her sub DPS, anyone with a decently vertically invested Zibai can probably get by fine without her. But again, if you're in that range of having a C0 Zibai with a low con Illua, then I can very strongly recommend her. Outside of Zibai teams, yeah, very similar to Lauma and to an extent a Nefer. Most Geo characters are kind of really bad right now, and they don't really have access to good supports because they just haven't received them in a long time, and just due to the amount of damage Linnea can do, especially with Columbina on the team, for most Geo carries like Noelle, like Navia, and like Ito, slapping them together on a Geo wheelchair team is probably going to be the best way to play them if you want them to feel really strong in the current meta, just like how Lauma brought up all the Dendro teams to like tier 1 status, just because of how busted she was as a support. In comparison to those two though, I think Linnea is the most restrictive. Lauma offers a Dendro and Hydro resistance shred, whilst giving a really strong flat damage bonus to blooms, and then a Nefer generally just does more sub DPS than Linnea, whilst EC is a more flexible element, and you also get access to Onoma units for double res shredding. But Linnea kind of only really is going to be good for Geo units. Her real sharing isn't as flexible as Lauma's or Nefer's, so I think there's less of a reason to pull for her if you don't also have Zibai. She isn't the greatest generalist. Now moving on, the first rerun character I want to talk about is Chasca. She was the first DPS to use different elements from her teammates, and that is kind of her gimmick. She can be a Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo DPS all at the same time, as well as being able to chain multiple different reactions together nicely, unlike someone like Varka who's more mono element oriented. Because of the way Chasca's kit is oriented, she is a very flexible character that is one of her main strengths. She can pretty much use every Pyro, Hydro, Electro, and Cryo support and have good teams with them, as well as within any archetype like Freeze, Vaporize, Melt, and so on. She's also an extremely comfortable character to pilot, as her gameplay loop is just flying above enemies' heads and raining down hell from above, and like 80% of the enemies in the game won't be able to hit her at all, and she's doing this with auto-targeting, so there's no real skill involved in her gameplay. So she's very easy to pilot and you most likely will have a good team for her right off the bat. For Chasca's negatives, there really is two big things, being her bullet RNG and the fact that she's very single target locked. When playing Chasca and Melt or Vaporize teams, you want to be triggering a lot of amplifying reactions, but because Chasca's bullet order is random, and also if you aren't playing a completely rainbow team, getting a fourth bullet is RNG, there will be cases where her damage fluctuates quite a bit, which can be annoying. And regarding the single target issue, her damage gets divided with the amount of enemies that are on screen, but with how ST oriented the hardest content in the game has been, I don't really think this is that big of a negative anymore really. The biggest problem with Chasca is just the fact that her output isn't that much. The Krai DPS units have kind of just exploded the cap on the game, and then even with Durin's release, who has helped her, some of the other Natlan DPS like Kinich and Varese have benefited more. The Hexray buffs have also shot Mulan up a bit, with Sucrose and Mona being amazing for her, and in comparison, since Chasca's made to work with everyone, she doesn't really have a specialized team that is competitive with them. The best thing going for Chasca is just the fact that her vertical investment is still very strong, like her C1, C2 and weapon, but with how much more demanding Dire has become, and even the Abyss, I feel like in comparison to the other DPS, it's becoming much harder to recommend Chasca. She's currently still good enough to where you're not bricking your account by pulling for her, but unless you really value her flexibility and comfort, I think you're better off currently getting a better DPS, which hurts me to say as a Chasca truther. Anyways, next up we have Nefer and Lauma. I guess I'll start with Lauma. I think I'm going to say the same thing I said on her release. If you want to revive any of your old Dendro Sumru units, like Cyno, like Tignari, like Nilu, the best way to do so is just via Lauma, as she's just the best Dendro support and it isn't really close. You can run pure Hyper Bloom setups, you can run quick Bloom setups for your Electro or Dendro DPSs, you can very easily slot her in Nilu teams. She offers up to a 25% Dendro and Hydro resistance shred, while being able to buff the hell out of Blooms via her burst and passives. And also, since her release, the second part of her kit being the Lunar Bloom buffs can now finally be used by Nefer, who is like 50k DPS stronger than every other Dendro team. Nefer is the most reliant on her dedicated support due to how much Lauma calls adds to her damage. So if you're someone who wants to main Nefer, Lauma is close to a must pull for you. Outside of the Sumru units and Nefer, well, that's basically the same thing. You know what I mean. Even though her Dendro application isn't the greatest, if you don't have a Nahida on your account, it may still be worth it for you to pick up Lauma, just because Dendro isn't that accessible of an element. So if any Abyss or Stygian lineups need Dendro for a specific boss or enemy type, it would be nice to know you just have the best one in your pocket. And Hyper Bloom is one of the cheapest teams to build in the game. You can get one going very easily. Not much has really changed from Lauma's release, while Columbina has made her strongest team stronger, and if you really want to stretch it, then Durin has made some Burden setups viable, but Lauma has just stayed as the premium support for Dendro and more specifically Bloom teams, so we can now switch topics and talk about the Lunar Bloom DPS Nefer. Nefer is one of the 3 Lunar DPSs, which translates to I run the game right now. Since her release, the biggest thing that's happened to Nefer is Columbina's release, who shot her up to arguably the strongest DPS in the game right now. Nefer was obviously really strong even without Columbina as long as you had Lauma, but there was a bit of awkwardness in her gameplay with having to wait for Verdant's dues, which means you either had to swap in a support in between Nefer's field time, or burst with Nefer every single rotation for her to have a comfortable gameplay loop. And then not only that, but Lauma just did no damage on her teams, as most of Lauma's damage comes from her hold skill, which she wasn't able to do on Nefer teams, as you'd be stealing dues away from Nefer. But now with Columbina, you're able to generate more dues a rotation, allowing Lauma to use her hold skill, so she can contribute more to the team's DPS, and whenever you on-field Nefer, it feels like you are cheating, as you were able to get out all of her dash cancels so easily, without having to wait for dues, and also lightening the burden of her having to burst every rotation. And since Nefer's release, more people have caught onto Sucrose being her best in slot over Nahida, due to Sucrose's buffs being team-wide, and both Instructors and Sucrose's EM buff being able to easily fit in one Nefer damage window. So yes, Nefer has aged amazingly and has only gotten better since her release, and I can very heavily recommend picking her up. Assuming you are also getting Lauma. There are still some negatives with Nefer. For one, she still doesn't have a good sustain, or well, she does, just pull for C1 Lauma, but if you can't afford that, your next best option ends up being someone like Kuki, which is decently worse than Nefer's peak sustainless teams. So if you aren't very confident in your dash cancels, you may be better with a different Krai DPS, as Zibaya and Flynn's are much more forgiving in this regard. And then speaking of unforgivingness, I do think Nefer is the most reliant on her dedicated support. Both Flynn's and Zibaya have a wider range of supports that can buff them. Hell, Iloa was on Zibaya's banner, whereas with Nefer, as I said before, besides Lauma, Dendro kind of sucks as an element. So please, if you're going for Nefer, secure your Lauma first and then dump your pulls into her, just to guarantee that she feels great for you. Now, like with the last banner, I don't really think there's a point in ranking who's the most valuable to least valuable. Linnea and Lauma just depend on which DPS you're speccing into, and then between Nefer and Chasca, Nefer is kind of just the better DPS currently. So yeah. Now to get into the optimal vertical investment paths for these characters, starting with Chasca, my opinion on her hasn't really changed. Chasca's weapon C1 and C2 are all ludicrous, it doesn't really matter which one you pick. And even though her weapon is the single strongest option, I really do think prioritizing her constellations is the best way to go with her, as they boost her flexibility by a ton, make her less punishing to play outside of triple PHEC teams, and also makes double pyre teams incredibly strong, with being able to chain melts much more comfortably. But if you are using free-to-play weapons and want a quick, cheaper upgrade, then of course there's no harm in going for the bow. For Nefer, here's a vertical investment infographic for her. This covers her personal DPR, but honestly doesn't really tell the whole story. Switching to more team DPS oriented calculations, both Nefer's Constellation 1 and getting her weapon are about the same increase, where Columbina's C1 isn't worth considering, and Lauma's C1 only does healing, which for most characters would suck, but because Nefer has no good sustains, hell, Dendro teams in general don't have good sustains, this honestly isn't that bad of a constellation, especially if you're also going for Lauma C2, which as you can see, despite not being the best for Nefer's personal damage, is actually still better for your overall team DPS, while you gain a sustain in the process. So if you're pulling on this banner, honestly, just go for Lauma C2. There actually isn't a better investment you can make for your Nefer team. And then from there, obviously you can start thinking about Nefer's own stuff, like her weapon and constellations. I would personally start with her weapon and then get her C1. And then with Lauma, no one should be pulling for her weapon. Etherlight is more than good enough and gives you comfort with the energy recharge it provides. Just go for Lauma constellations. For Linnea, she's also just a put the constellations in the bag character, as her constellations are broken. Linnea C1 isn't really that great. Like if you could only get one upgrade, you would rather get her weapon. But hold on, come here. Let us look at this C2 together. That is 40% Hydra and Geo crit damage, and that is additional lunar crystallized damage procs whenever Linnea does direct lunar crystallized damage. These are very comparable to getting Zibaya's constellations, so yes, I would recommend just going for them over the weapon. But with that, I have nothing else to say, so thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment who you're pulling for in Luna 6, as I would love to hear it and I respond to almost every single comment. Channel members, thank you so much for your blessings. I hope I can continue to make content you enjoy. I'll be streaming again soon. Thanks to everyone else for watching too, and I'll see you guys on the flip side. Peace.